The phone rang while I was washing dishes at my kitchen sink. I remember that detail clearly because everything about that evening felt calm until the moment it did not. The water was warm on my hands, and the evening sun was fading behind the trees outside my window. If this story touches you, please stay until the end, and do not forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support means more than you know. I dried my hands on a towel and picked up the phone without checking who was calling. I should have looked first. Maybe then I would have had a moment to prepare myself for what was coming. "Mom," my daughter said quickly, her voice light and rushed. "I just wanted to let you know you do not need to come to the lake house this summer. Marcus thinks it would be better if we keep it for our immediate family this year." There was no pause before the words. No warning. No softness. "Love you," she added. "I will call you later." Then the line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, the towel still in my hand, staring at the phone screen as if it might explain itself. At first I truly believed I had misheard her. The lake house. The one I had built with my own money. The one I had poured 2 years of my life into. Surely she could not mean that house. I turned off the tap and sat down slowly at my kitchen table. "My name is Mary. I am 67 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and a widow of 8 years. I spent 32 years standing in front of classrooms, teaching children how to read, how to solve problems, how to be kind to one another. I thought after all those years I understood people. I thought I understood my own daughter. I was wrong. Some wounds do not knock before they enter. They simply appear in the middle of an ordinary evening and change everything that comes after." I thought about calling her back, not to argue, but only to hear her say it again, slower this time, with some kind of explanation that would make sense of what I had just heard. Instead I placed the phone face down on the table and said nothing. Sometimes silence tells you more than another conversation ever could. That night sleep refused to come. I lay in bed replaying her words, not because they were cruel, but because they were said so easily. As if the decision had already been made long before she called me. As if someone else's permission mattered more than mine. By morning I understood that something inside our relationship had shifted, and I had simply not noticed it happening. To understand how deep this wound went, you have to understand where that house came from, and why it was never just a building to me. My husband was named James. Before he became sick, we used to take long drives on weekends, out through the quiet countryside where the roads wound beside lakes and old farms. Every time we passed water, he would slow the car down and smile at it the way other men smiled at sports cars. One day he would say, "We will have a porch that looks out over water." I always laughed at him. "We are a teacher and a mechanic," I would tease, "not people with that kind of money." "We do not need a lot of money," he would answer. "We only need enough, and enough patience." Then illness came into our lives and changed the shape of every conversation we had. Doctor visits replaced weekend drives. Medicine schedules replaced vacation planning. Hope slowly turned into something quieter, something more like acceptance. After James passed away, it took me nearly 2 years to learn how to live in a house that no longer held his voice. Then one afternoon, while cleaning out an old closet, I found a notebook I had never seen before. Inside were pencil drawings. A porch that wrapped around a house. Big kitchen windows. A stone fireplace. Nothing fancy. Just a simple dream drawn in soft pencil lines. I cried harder that afternoon than I had in months. Not because the drawings were sad, but because they reminded me that dreams do not always die with the people who imagine them. Sometimes someone else has to finish them. Using the money from his life insurance, along with the savings I had built over 3 decades of teaching, I bought 8 acres of land beside a quiet lake 2 hours from my home. The deed carried only one name. Every payment came from my account. Every decision about the house was mine to make. Every signature on every document belonged to me alone. That house was not an inheritance waiting to happen. It was not a family investment. It was my home, built from my husband's unfinished dream and my own 2 hands. Building it tested every bit of patience I had left. Every other weekend I drove those 2 hours to meet with the builder, a steady older man named Walter who rarely wasted words. "If you want it done right," he told me once, "you need patience." I have waited my whole life for this, I told him. I can wait a little longer. Room by room, the house slowly rose out of the ground. When it was finally finished, I unlocked the front door alone. No celebration. No family waiting inside. Just quiet. And yet it did not feel lonely. Felt like peace. I walked through every room slowly, running my hand along walls I had watched being built from nothing. When I reached the kitchen, the afternoon light poured across the wooden floor exactly the way James had once drawn it in his notebook. For the first time since losing him, I smiled without forcing it. We finally made it, I whispered into the empty house, and the words settled softly into the walls around me. I believed in that moment that this house would be the place my family gathered for decades to come. I never imagined it would one day become the reason we fell apart. The first summer after the house was finished was everything I had hoped for. My daughter Diane arrived with her husband Marcus and their 2 children on a warm Friday afternoon. My son Dominic drove in the next day with his wife Rachel. By the time the sun went down, the quiet house had turned into the lively gathering place James and I had once dreamed about. Laughter filled the back porch. The grandchildren ran through the yard chasing fireflies while Marcus grilled burgers near the patio. Dominic helped me carry coolers in from the car, and Rachel set the table without me even having to ask. For the first time in years, every room in that house had someone in it. Every chair was filled. Every dinner turned into a long conversation that lasted well past dark. Those early mornings became some of the happiest memories of my life. Diane would join me in the kitchen before anyone else woke up, and we would drink coffee together by the big windows, watching the sun rise over the water. "You really did it, Mom," she said one morning, looking around the kitchen with something like wonder in her eyes. "Guess I did," I said. "Your father would have loved this place." "I built it for both of us," I told her. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and in that moment I believed nothing could ever come between us. Looking back now, I wish I had held on to that moment a little longer, because the following summer felt different. Not dramatically different. Not all at once. Just different enough for me to notice that something had quietly begun to shift. Marcus started making suggestions. First they sounded harmless. "This would make a great home office," he said one afternoon, standing in the upstairs guest room. Another time he pointed toward the unfinished storage space and said, "You could easily turn this into another bedroom." I nodded politely each time. "Those are interesting ideas," I would say. "I have been thinking about ways to improve the place," he told me once, and something about that sentence stuck with me. Improve the place, as if it already belonged to him. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. Families talk about ideas all the time. There was no reason to assume anything more. Weeks later I arrived for another visit, and immediately noticed the furniture had been rearranged. The reading chair I had placed beside the fireplace with such care now sat against the opposite wall. Several of my framed photographs had disappeared from the mantel entirely. The guest bedroom had become Marcus' office, filled with a computer, filing cabinets, and shelves of folders that had nothing to do with any of us. Nobody had mentioned any of it to me. Diane noticed me looking around the room. "Oh," she said casually, "Marcus thought this layout worked better." "See," I said. "Makes sense if that is what you prefer." Inside, though, something did not sit right with me. Nobody had asked. They had simply decided. The small changes kept coming after that. Kitchen cabinets were reorganized without warning. My gardening tools disappeared from the shed because Marcus needed the space for his fishing gear. Even family weekends slowly began to revolve around his schedule. If he had work calls, breakfast happened later. If he wanted quiet, the grandchildren were told to play farther away from the house. The rhythm of the home I had built slowly stopped being mine. One Saturday afternoon I found Diane replacing the curtains in the living room. "The blue ones looked a little dated," she explained. "I liked those curtains," I said quietly. "I know," she said, "but these are brighter." I looked around the room and realized almost every decorative choice now reflected her and Marcus' taste. Mine had quietly disappeared, piece by piece, without a single conversation about it. I told myself that families change, that people redecorate, that it was not worth starting an argument over a set of curtains. But deep down I knew this was never really about the curtains. It was about who this house belonged to, and whether that still mattered to anyone but me. The conversation that changed everything happened near the end of that summer. We were sitting on the back porch, watching the grandchildren skip stones across the water, when Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "we spend more time here than anyone else does." Diane nodded beside him. "It would probably make sense," he continued, "if we treated this as our permanent vacation place." I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "You hardly use it anymore," he said with a shrug. "I use it whenever I choose to," I said. "Sure," he replied, "but we are here almost every weekend." Diane spoke up softly. "I think Marcus just means it makes practical sense, Mom." Practical. There was that word again, the same word people always use right before they take something that is not theirs. "This house is not about convenience," I said, folding my hands calmly in my lap. Neither of them answered me. After a long silence, Diane finally offered a small, awkward smile. "Of course it is still your house, Mom," she said. She said the words, but somehow they did not sound true anymore. That night, while everyone else slept upstairs, I sat alone on the porch long after midnight. The lake was perfectly still, but inside me, something had begun to stir. For the first time since building that house, I felt like a guest inside my own home, a home that carried my name on every single legal document. I did not know it yet, but the hardest lesson of all was still waiting for me, and it was about to arrive in the form of a single envelope. The envelope came on a quiet Tuesday morning. It looked completely ordinary. Plain white, my name typed neatly across the front. No handwritten note. No warning of what was inside. I carried it to the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened it without much thought. Within seconds my appetite disappeared completely. The letter came from a lawyer I had never met in my life. The language was polite and carefully worded, the kind of writing that tries to sound gentle while asking for something enormous. It explained that Diane and Marcus wished to discuss transferring ownership of the lake house into their names. According to the letter, this would simplify future family planning and ensure the property remained available for future generations. There was no threat in it. No demand written in anger. Just a quiet assumption that I would eventually sign everything away. I read the letter 3 times. Each time made one thing clearer to me. Someone out there already believed they had a claim to my home. I folded the papers and placed them carefully back into the envelope, then sat staring out my kitchen window for a long while. The problem was never really the paperwork itself. It was the confidence behind it. Nobody sends a lawyer unless they already believe the answer is supposed to be yes. 3 days later I decided to drive to the lake house without telling anyone I was coming. The drive felt strangely heavy, nothing like the excitement I used to feel making that same trip years before. This time I could not shake the feeling that I was driving toward something I did not want to confirm. When I reached the property, everything looked exactly the same from the outside. The flowers were blooming along the walkway. The porch swing moved gently in the wind. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun as if nothing in the world had changed. I walked up to the front door, reached into my purse and pulled out my key. I slid it into the lock. It would not turn. I frowned and tried again. Nothing happened. I checked my keyring thinking maybe I had grabbed the wrong one, but no, it was the correct key. I tried a 3rd time. The lock had been changed. I stood there on my own porch, staring at the doorknob, and the realization hit me before I even reached for my phone. Someone had changed the locks on my house without ever telling me. Called Diane. She picked up after the 2nd ring. "Hi Mom," she said. "My key does not work," I told her. There was a brief pause on the line. "Oh right," she said, her voice sounding strangely rehearsed. "Marcus had the locks changed last week." "Why?" I asked. "It was just for security." "Security from whom?" I asked again. "It is not a big deal," she said. "It becomes a big deal when the owner cannot get into her own house," I told her. Another pause followed. "I meant to tell you," she said, "but you did not," I answered quietly. She sighed. "We will get you a new key," she said. I looked at the closed door in front of me. My own house should not require permission to enter, I said. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally she whispered, I am sorry. But the apology felt incomplete. It acknowledged how I felt, but not what they had actually done. I never asked for a new key. Instead I turned around, walked back to my car, and sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. The house sat only a few feet away from me. A house I had built with my own hands. A house I had paid for entirely on my own. A house that suddenly felt farther away from me than any place I had ever lived. I sat there for almost 20 minutes, not crying, not angry, just thinking clearly for the first time in a long while. Over the past 2 years I had ignored every single warning sign. The rearranged furniture. The changed curtains. The casual talk about permanent vacation homes. The lawyer's letter. Every time something felt wrong, I told myself I was simply overreacting. Now the evidence stood directly in front of me, locked behind a door I could not open. They had not forgotten who owned this house. They had simply decided it no longer mattered. That realization hurt far more than any locked door ever could. Back at my own home, I pulled out a large folder from my office cabinet. Inside were every document connected to that property. The purchase agreement. The recorded deed. Every construction invoice. Every building permit. Every bank statement and insurance policy. Every single page carried only one legal owner. Mary. No joint ownership. No trust. No transfer agreement of any kind. Nothing on paper gave anyone else the authority to change a single lock on that house. I spread the papers across my dining room table and studied them one by one. For the first time in months, I stopped making excuses for my daughter and her husband. Facts do not need interpretation. Either someone respects what belongs to you or they do not. That evening I called Diane one more time. I was thinking of spending this weekend at the lake, I told her. She hesitated. This weekend might not work for us, she said. I will stay out of everyone's way, I offered. We already have plans, Mom, she said. Maybe next weekend. I will have to ask Marcus, she added. Those 6 words settled deep inside my chest. I will have to ask Marcus. She was not asking the owner of the house anymore. She was asking the man who had already begun behaving like one. I ended the call politely and sat alone in my quiet kitchen for a long time afterward. Then I opened my laptop and searched for real estate agents near the lake. By midnight I had chosen one. The next morning I called to schedule a meeting. For the first time since all of this began, I was not reacting anymore. I was preparing to make a decision that would change everything. The real estate agent came to see the property the following Thursday afternoon. Her name was Susan, and unlike most salespeople I had met over the years, she did not waste time making promises she could not keep. She walked through every room with a small notebook, stopping occasionally to write something down. After nearly an hour, she joined me on the back porch overlooking the water. You have taken excellent care of this place, she said. Have tried, I told her. The market is strong right now, she added. Have heard, I said. If you decide to sell, she continued, I do not think it will sit on the market very long. I looked out over the calm lake for a moment. I am not interested in a long process, I told her. She studied my face carefully before speaking again. Has something happened, she asked gently. I smiled politely. Let us just say I am ready for a new chapter, I said. She did not ask another question after that. I appreciated her for it. Some stories do not need to be explained to strangers. The listing went live the following Monday. Professional photographs showed every room exactly as I remembered designing it years earlier. The wide kitchen. The stone fireplace. The screened porch facing the water. The sunrise glowing across the lake in the early morning photographs. Within 24 hours, Susan called with news. We already have 3 showings scheduled, she said. By the end of the week that number had doubled. Interest came from families searching for vacation homes, from retired couples looking for quiet lakeside living, and from one couple hoping to move there permanently. Every evening Susan called with an update. We have received our first offer, she told me one night. The next day, now there are 2, then a third. And one of them is an all-cash offer. She sent me each proposal to review. Some buyers offered a higher price but wanted long inspection periods and delayed closing dates. One couple submitted a clean cash offer with a short closing timeline and almost no conditions attached. If I were advising my own family, Susan told me, this is the offer I would choose. I agreed with her. The amount was more than I had expected, but surprisingly, the money was not what convinced me. It was the certainty. I wanted everything finished before anyone had a chance to interfere. The paperwork moved quickly after that. I met Susan and the closing attorney in a small office near the courthouse. Stacks of documents sat neatly arranged on the table in front of me. Each signature felt like another step toward closing one chapter of my life and opening another. The attorney reviewed every page carefully with me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "do you understand that once these documents are recorded, ownership transfers permanently to the buyers?" "I understand completely," I told him. "Are you signing this of your own free will?" he asked. "Absolutely," I answered. I signed my name one final time. Mary Carter. When the last page was notarized, the attorney reached out to shake my hand. "Congratulations," he said. For a brief moment I was not sure that congratulations was quite the right word for what I was feeling. Perhaps freedom fit a little better. A week later the sale closed officially. The funds appeared in my bank account early one morning. I looked at the number only once before closing the app. Money had never been the real point of any of this. Peace was. I spent the next several days settling quietly back into my normal routine. Morning walks, gardening, reading on my back patio with a cup of tea. I did not contact Diane and she did not contact me either. The silence between us felt strange, but strangely comforting too. It gave me space to think clearly for the first time in months. Everything changed the following Saturday. My phone rang again and again just after noon. 3 missed calls, then 4, then 6. Finally I answered. "Mom," Diane said, sounding out of breath. I stayed quiet. "They are moving furniture inside," she said. There was a pause. "They said they bought the property." "That is correct," I told her. Silence stretched across the line. "What do you mean?" she finally asked. "That is correct," I repeated. "I sold the house." For several seconds she said nothing at all. Then came the question I had been expecting from the very beginning. "You sold it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said. "Without telling us," she said. "It was my property," I answered calmly. Her breathing grew heavier through the phone. "But we have been staying there all year," she said. "I know," I said. "We had plans," she said. "So did I told her. Her voice cracked slightly. "Mom, why would you do this?" she asked. I answered as calmly as I could manage. "When you told me I did not need to come to my own house," I began. She did not interrupt me. "When your lawyer sent papers asking me to give away ownership," I continued. Still nothing from her. "And when I discovered someone had changed the locks without ever asking me," I said. The silence on the other end became almost unbearable. "You had already decided the house belonged to you," I said. Another long pause followed before she finally whispered, "We never thought you would actually sell it." "I know," I told her. Those 4 words carried everything else that no longer needed to be said. I could hear Marcus' voice faintly in the background, asking her something I could not quite make out. She covered the phone for a moment before coming back. "What are we supposed to do now?" she asked. I looked out through my living room window at the flowers blooming in my garden. "Exactly what every homeowner does when a house does not belong to them," I said. She did not respond after that. The call ended quietly, without another word between us. I placed the phone down on my coffee table and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in over a year, I was not waiting on anyone else's decision anymore. My own had already been made, and I had made it with a clear mind and a steady heart. The phone calls continued for nearly a week after that. Some came from Diane. Few came from Marcus. Others came from numbers I did not recognize at all. Most went unanswered. I was not trying to punish anyone. I simply had nothing left that needed explaining. Every important conversation had already happened. They had simply not been listening when it mattered most. On the 8th day, Diane left a voicemail. Her voice sounded different this time. The confidence that had once filled every sentence she spoke was gone completely. "Mom, can we please talk?" she said. "I think we both said things we should not have. I know you are upset, but maybe we can work this out." I listened to the message twice before deleting it. Some problems can be solved with another conversation. Others begin because too many conversations were ignored for too long. This one I already knew was the second kind. Few days later there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Diane stood alone on the porch, looking exhausted. Dark circles rested under her eyes, and she held her purse tightly against her side, as though it might offer her some kind of protection. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without saying a word. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she used to share coffee with me on so many quiet mornings years earlier. For a while neither of us spoke. Finally she broke the silence. "I never thought it would end like this," she said. "Neither did I told her. She lowered her eyes to the table. "Marcus believed that eventually you would leave the house to us anyway," she said. "I probably would have," I admitted. Her head lifted quickly. "Was," she said. "I likely would have left it to both of my children one day," I told her. She stared at me in disbelief. "Then why sell it?" she asked. "Because inheritance is a gift," I said. "It is not something people take while the owner is still alive." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I did not realize how much we hurt you," she said quietly. I nodded slowly. "That is because neither of you stopped long enough to ask," I told her. She admitted things then that I had already suspected. The lawyer's letter had been Marcus' idea from the start. Changing the locks had been his decision as well. At first she claimed she had simply gone along with his choices to avoid arguments at home. Then she stopped herself mid-sentence. "That is not completely true," she said. I agreed because part of me had started believing the house was already ours. There it was. The truth, finally. Not hidden behind excuses or softened by careful wording. Just honest. "I forgot that you were sharing your dream with us," she whispered. I started treating it like it was mine. For the first time since everything had happened, I believed she truly understood. Understanding, however, does not erase consequences. Before she left, she asked one final question. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" she asked. I looked toward the family photographs hanging on my dining room wall. Some showed birthdays. Others showed old holidays. One photo showed James smiling beside the lake on one of our very first trips there together. "You cannot bring back the house," I told her carefully. "I know," she said, "but you can decide how you treat people from this day forward." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "I want to," she said. "I hope you do," I answered. She stood up, hugged me quietly, and walked toward the front door. I hugged her back, not because everything was suddenly repaired, but because carrying bitterness any longer would only end up hurting both of us in the end. Forgiveness does not always rebuild trust right away. Sometimes it simply allows your heart to move forward, one quiet step at a time. Over the following months, life slowly became peaceful again. I bought a smaller cottage closer to my hometown, one that required far less upkeep and looked out over a small park instead of a lake. Children played there every afternoon. Neighbors greeted one another during evening walks. It was not the dream James and I had once imagined together, but that dream had already served its purpose in my life. Now I wanted something simpler, something lighter to carry. My son Dominic visited often after I moved in. He never once asked me about the money from the sale of the lake house. Instead, he would help me plant flowers along the walkway, fix a loose board on the fence, or stay for dinner before driving home in the evening. One night he looked around my new little cottage and smiled at me. "You seem happier," he said. I told him. "What changed?" he asked. I thought about his question for a moment before answering. "I finally stopped confusing generosity with obligation," I said. He nodded quietly. "I think Dad would have agreed with that," he said. "So do I," I told him, and I meant it with my whole heart. People often believe the hardest part of losing a home is handing over the keys. It is not. The hardest part is realizing that someone you love stopped seeing it as yours long before you ever let it go. But life has a strange way of teaching us the hardest lessons right before it offers us peace. I do not regret building that lake house. not for one single moment. It gave my husband's dream a place to live and breathe in this world. And I do not regret selling it either. That decision taught me something I should have learned long before that summer. Respecting yourself is never selfish. Love should never require surrendering your dignity. And kindness should never be mistaken for weakness by the people who claim to love you most. Ownership, whether it is a house, a dream, or your own life, belongs to the person who had the courage to build it in the first place. Sometimes the greatest gift you can leave your family is not a piece of property at all. It is the example of knowing exactly when to stand up for yourself, and having the strength to actually do it. That lesson, unlike any house, can never be taken away from you. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my place, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.